This is The Healthy Healer, where true voice is your medicine. This is where we help doctors and other healers navigate through the challenging times by learning from the best minds in the healing industry. Laugh, cry, and be surprised. It's entertainment, education, and inspiration so you can continue to be the unique and amazing healer you were destined to be. Welcome to humanity. Welcome to The Healthy Healer with Dr. Fred.
Hello, everyone. It's Dr. Fred, and today I have the honor and privilege of introducing to you someone who has become recently a good friend of mine, and that's Nurse Keith Carlson. I was on Nurse Keith's show as a guest fairly recently, and we had a great time and a great conversation. So the best I could do is reciprocate and give a good plan and a good playground for both Nurse Keith and I to have a great conversation in supposedly a different direction, as we learn about each other and then share what we have learned about humanity and about healing and about curing and about health and about growth and development of what it really means to go from being someone who has had a hard and challenging life, someone who's had plenty of obstacles, and transforms and transmutes that into being someone who can be an effective and honest to goodness healer, someone who can care about humanity and make a widespread difference in the world. And that for sure is Nurse Keith Carlson. So Keith, welcome to the Healthy Healer. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Fred. It's so nice to be here. Nice to see you again. And thank you for that lovely introduction.
You're welcome. So Keith, I like to ask a simple question when I start off the show, and it's a 9-letter question. It's basically 9 letters total. And sometimes it puts people back on their heels, but I think you're strong and wise enough to be able to field it well. So here we go. Nurse Keith, who are you?
Who am I? That's an excellent question, Fred. I'm not back on my heels. I'm good. Let's see. Well, I am someone who has focused the majority of most of my adult life on serving other people. So I began my, you could call it, professional career as a massage therapist and a yoga teacher and healer, I guess you can say, to some extent. And that morphed at a certain point in my early 30s into nursing. And I've been a nurse for 27 years. And that has even morphed a number of times. And right around 2009, 2010, I discovered coaching, and that led me into the realm of coaching nurses mostly and some other healthcare professionals. And while I still do a little bit of clinical nursing, my work has mostly focused on supporting other nurses on their journey, whether it be around their career, which is the majority, and some who really need some guidance around kind of where their life is headed. So my identity revolves a lot around being a nurse, but also a writer, a podcaster, a healer, I guess you could say, and also just a person in the world who dedicated to serving other people.
Beautiful. Okay. So that does all translate into being of service to other people from a very young age. It seems to me, you call yourself that you've been a nurse and you've been a yoga teacher, a yogi, and you've also been a coach and a writer and a podcaster and a healer of sorts. You seem to rattle a little bit when you call yourself a healer, but that's exactly who I see you as. So I wonder, what do you think? What do you think led you? Was there a seed that got laid? Maybe even something as small as some form of mustard seed or an event or a growth pattern that led you into realizing that being of service as an adult was going to be the route that you were going to take?
That's interesting. That's an interesting question. Right around the time I was finishing high school, my great uncle died, and my great aunt and uncle were well-known painters in the New York school. And when he died, I think I was 17, and I struck up what became a very deep friendship with my great aunt, who was then in her late 90s. And we were very, very, very good friends through her death at the age of 112.
112.
So, yeah. While I didn't do like direct care of her. She had other people caring for her. My relationship with her really opened my eyes to the world of the elderly. Even though I
Yeah.
had grandparents, she and I became particularly close. And I was sort of her secretary. We did all sorts of things together. And it was her influence on a certain level that led me to go to art school. But then I ended up dropping out of art school twice, not once, twice. And that led me into this world of feeling like, hmm, doing art just feels too solitary. It doesn't feel like it's really doing anything really tangible for other people. And art therapy at the time in the early 80s just wasn't really much of a thing yet. It was pretty kind of on the fringes. So that led me into yoga and massage and that sort of thing, and also elder care before I became a nurse. So I think it was that relationship with my great aunt to a large extent that opened my eyes to like, oh, I have this certain affinity for elderly people. And I like that one-on-one. I like that the essence of that kind of relationship. And so I really got a lot out of that, and it did lead me down a particular path. So I think that was one of the mustard seeds, as you say, that really eventually led me in that direction.
Beautiful. That's a great explanation and a great story. And what an amazing great aunt you had. Wow,
She was pretty
112 years.
cool. She
I
was
guess
cool.
so.
Yeah.
And you probably were somewhat responsible for the last 12 to 15 years of her life, giving her a purpose inside of her relationship with you. I don't know if you've ever thought about that, but people live around in that age. As you know, the elders often live and then die, actually perish when at certain points, when there's reasons to live, they live. And when there's time to die, they die. And I wonder what your impact was in giving her her last decade and a half of the, at 90, had she died at 97, that already would have been pretty old, but she stayed
Hmm.
around for a whole decade and a half after that. So thank
She
you for
did
being that
indeed.
for her. Yeah.
Thanks. And she painted and was a writer till about 109 or 110 when she started
Wow.
going downhill. So you can
Wow.
kind of imagine she was this real force of nature
I
and
guess so.
had had quite a determined way of living in the world and very focused, and she loved people, and she really introduced me to this notion of really maintaining relationships with people over long periods of time and having a lot of different relationships. And she influenced me greatly in that particular way too.
That's fantastic. So was she an influence in you either going to art school or dropping out of art school, not once, but twice?
She was an influence on me going to art school, not dropping out. She had a hard time with me dropping out, but once I decided on a direction, that's all she really wanted, was she wanted me to choose a path. And so
Right.
she was very supportive once I kind of found my footing, but I was young, I was in my early 20s, and she, in her wisdom, was quite patient in allowing me the space to find my way, even though she also had lots of opinions to share along the way, I'm sure you can imagine.
I can imagine. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I just to let you know, we not only do we share putting our title and then our first name in front of us when we are podcasting with each other. I also am a two-time college dropout, so that's really great that
Huh.
we share that. So
All
uh,
right.
I
Two
dropped
thumbs
out.
up for dropping
Yeah,
out of college.
yeah, it's a good thing. I'm really happy to say that I'm a two-time dropout. In both times that I went, I did the right thing to drop out. And when I came around a third time, obviously I came around and stuck in there long enough to get a profession that works, as you did as well. So you
Mhm.
speak a little bit to eventually choosing maybe eldercare as a route or as a pathway to lead you into what eventually became nursing, right? Like a standard
Mhm.
nursing degree. And
Mhm.
is that what you have? Do you have a standard nursing degree, or are you a registered nurse, or how does that work? How did the growth into nursing actually conspire to happen?
Yeah, I went directly
Transpire.
for an associate degree at a community college in Western Massachusetts, and that associate degree gives you the designation of registered nurse because you pass the national licensing exam, the NCLEX. And then very shortly thereafter, I went on to get a bachelor's in nursing.
Okay, a bachelor's in nursing, and
Yeah.
that's a significant upgrade from what an RN is, right? Once you get a bachelor's in nursing, you have more power, more latitude, more things you can or are counted on to do in the healthcare field. Is that fair?
That's true. Yeah. RNs have lots of power and sort of breadth of practice. And when you get your BSN, your scope of practice doesn't change per se. What happens is that a lot of facilities and organizations won't hire you unless you have a bachelor's degree. So it kind of opens up certain worlds once you get the baccalaureate.
Interesting. Beautiful. You know, I noticed in your bio that you talked about some challenges that you had as a youth, or maybe as a young adult, or maybe yesterday, maybe today. I'm
Hmm.
not really sure. And
Hmm.
one of the things we really tend to focus on in this particular podcast are the transmutation of our challenges, the obstacles that we faced on our way through, so that we then got to heal ourselves in order to become effective healers. Do you care to speak to a little bit of what some of your traumatic experiences were, or some of your obstacles or hurdles that you went through in your early life that have contributed to you being such a force of nature by as yourself, after all?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I'm pretty open in general. So, yeah, I'm happy to share. Um, the earliest traumatic experience I can pinpoint that was, very specific and concrete was my parents' divorce, which involved there was infidelity, there was all sorts of stuff involved in that particular process. My father's suicidality after the divorce. So there was a lot in those formative years around
Mhm.
the ages of 11, 12, 13, 14 that had a big impact on me. Um, Later in life, actually, as an adult, it had more to do with death. So, deaths of loved ones, especially friends, started to figure really largely. And the biggest one, actually, and this is a long story, and I'll just tell a super encapsulated version that right after 9/11, which was traumatic enough for all of us with
Yeah.
the world, changing and turning upside down in the course of 24 hours. Several months after that, a friend of mine was killed by the police.
Mm.
And it was under very unusual circumstances in southern Vermont. And I and my ex-wife and my stepson all developed pretty strong post-traumatic stress disorder, or at least you could call it post-traumatic stress after his death and in the aftermath of everything that happened with the inquiry into his what we called a murder by police.
Mhm.
So that particular challenge, you know how there are these moments in life that you look at, like life before that thing
Yeah,
happened and life
of course.
after that. And many of us have measured our lives by, what life was like before 9/11 and after 9/11. And many of us now look at before COVID and after COVID. Well, for us, our friend Woody's murder, life really took a major turn with his
Mm.
murder December 2nd, 2001. So for us, it was like life before December 2nd and life after December 2nd. And that
Mm.
was a really seminal moment in life that provided incredible amounts of grist for my particular personal mill, so to speak.
Mhm. Mhm. And how did it translate in real life? How did it translate in your profession or your family or your capacity to hold relationships or your love or your fear for government or for police or for
Mhm.
guns or who knows what else it is? Like, what were some of the things that were the aftermath of after Woody?
Good question. A lot of it definitely had to do with police, so there was a lot to grapple with around that particular topic. And as you can imagine, in these intervening years, subsequent years since then, there's been a lot of attention on police violence. So I've had all sorts of shifts in perspective around that, and my perspective is still shifting to this day. But in terms of my life, I mean, we all know how post-traumatic stress can impact, as you already referenced, relationships, marriage, parenting, the ability to care for oneself. I think what happened for me is that in my professional work, at the time I was working in Springfield, Massachusetts, which is a very kind of down on its heels city, especially back then, 25, 30 years ago. And I was working with the poorest of the poor in the Latino neighborhoods. Wonderful, wonderful community, mostly of Puerto Rican elders, and actually all generations. But it was a cohort of patients who had very, very high needs. And in my desire to be needed, I believe that I didn't blur boundaries in terms of doing anything inappropriate, but I blurred boundaries in terms of my how far I would go to be
Right.
of service.
Understood.
And that caused me to burn out in a spectacular way. And
Mm,
my then wife, bless her heart, had to basically at a certain point grab me by the scruff of the neck and be like, "You're quitting this job."
mm,
And actually, she and I are still wonderful friends to this day. Um, that changed the course of my life when she
mm,
said, "You need to do something different now." And
mm.
sometimes we need someone to literally grab us by the scruff of the neck when we're in that sort of extreme state, don't we?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Especially we get all seduced and immersed in our caretaking and our healing, right? In what we offer when we're being of service, that
Hmm.
the self, is left of the self, can get annihilated in that process, and then you become ineffective to the people in your inner circle that are important to you, and to the
Exactly.
other items and things that you might have been committed to that were critical in your life. Become less important as you are simply of maximum service, supposedly.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Forgetting to pull the mask down for yourself before you take care of anyone else, of course.
That it's a cliche that works, and cliches are cliches for a reason because you have to do it. And when
You
you
really
don't
do.
do it, you pay a price, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, Keith, you talk a lot about how your nursing has developed, and then I hear you speaking very openly about your family and your ex-wife and your stepchild and your present wife, and that these are really important relationships to you. How has been a writer, and a keynote speaker, a leader? How has that impacted now your present relationships? And
Hmm.
especially your loving relationships. Let's hear
Ah.
what is going down in
Hmm.
both directions, how they interface with each other.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, Fred, you asked such good questions. Um, I did greatly transform my life about 13 years ago when my ex-wife kind of forced me to make a change. And we actually made a geographic change too. We sold almost everything we owned. We bought an old RV. We traveled around the country for almost a year looking for community, looking for a new place to be, and ended up in Santa Fe. And we both still live here, even though we're now
Mhm.
divorced. And um,
Great place to end
I
up, by the way. I was
yeah, it is a
I when I was in the heat of my nomadic days, that's exactly where I ended up, with Santa Fe, New Mexico. So I fully understand. It's a great place to end
it's
up.
it happens. It
Yeah.
happens. They call it's the land of enchantment, but we also call it the land of entrapment because it's
Yeah,
hard to leave
exactly.
once you're here. Yeah.
Uh,
We
yeah.
arrived for 6 months and it's been 13 years, so go
Yeah.
figure.
Understood.
So that transformation of my professional life, creating pretty much my own thing. I sort of became a podcaster when podcasting wasn't a thing, became a nurse coach when nurse coaching wasn't a thing. I just fell into all these different paths. And what it did is it created space for me to kind of curate my life in a way and not have to always be working on someone else's time. And while being self employed definitely has a lot of challenges. And I'll be honest, like right now, I actually am doing some clinical work because when things are slow, I need to fill in the gaps financially. And that's kind of what I can do as a nurse, is I can pick up work as needed when the coaching or writing is not quite as remunerative as it's been at other periods.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it's allowed me a lot of flexibility, and that allowed me has allowed me more time and space to hang out with my friends, hang out with my loved ones. And my fiance right now is an astrologer and a reader of the tarot. She's very, very talented. And she's created her very own life that she has complete control over. So the two of us being self employed, or me being mostly self employed, allows us to have time together when we want to have time together. And,
Beautiful.
and if I was going off to a nursing job every morning at 7:45 and getting home at 6:30 or 7 p.m. every night, we would still love each other, of course, but the tenor of our days would be different because I'd be coming home exhausted from long days at work.
Right.
And we interface so much throughout most days in a really lovely way that, you know, we have this freedom. And whereas I pick up other work here and there, it's at this juncture, it's more of a novelty. Like I go off to work for a while and come back later in the day, and it's not a daily occurrence. And not everybody has the privilege of doing that. And not everyone has the wherewithal to create that, but I feel really lucky that I can. And I,
Yeah.
I think it's really wonderful that she can as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so it's kind of like a work style, lifestyle issue. And
Mhm.
I continually sort of trying to figure out the best way to do it.
Yeah.
And some days are better than others, but most days it's good because I feel like I have a pretty fair amount of control.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, yeah, I referenced her as your wife, but I actually knew she
That's
was your
okay.
fiance, so I know that. And there's an opportunity to look here at, how you underline her capacity, to be a super talented astrologer and a tarot reader, et cetera. Um, I am wondering what level of sort of spirituality or mysticism or supernatural interest do you have in your own life that might be playing a role on the ground pragmatically as a nurse or as a community man, just as a human being right now in your life? How affected are you by spirituality, higher power, mysticism, etc., like and astrology, I suppose, and other
Hmm.
aspects of life that are somehow often considered alternative?
Yeah, good question. In earlier iterations of my life, like my early 20s, my later 20s, and we were just talking about this today. I did lots and lots and lots of exploring in those particular worlds. And then in the intervening years, my 30s and 40s, and now I'm at the end of my 50s, it's become less of a thing for me.
Hmm.
So when we got together, it really was not as big a part of my life as it has been in the past. So it's interesting. We she just started a tarot class, and we had it here at our house last night, and I sat in, and I'll be sitting in every couple weeks. And a lot of it is pretty esoteric for me, but I also do my best to wrap my head around it. Um, and I think it's going to be a little harder for me than other people in the class because many of them are much more well versed in esoteric studies and hermeticism, etc. So it's an interesting point in my life in my late 50s where mysticism and the occult and all these other ways of looking at the world and the nature of reality have not figured as largely in my life. And it's interesting because for many people it's the other way around,
Right.
that
Exactly.
as they age, they age into those ways of being and thinking, and I've sort of aged away from them. So with Shada in my life the last 2 years, and we'll be together the rest of our lives, it'll be interesting to see what happens. And we talk about this stuff every day because she lives and breathes it. So it's interesting to integrate it into my thinking, even though it's not as central for me as it is for her, obviously. And
Hmm.
one of the nice ways it interfaces is that a lot of my career coaching clients have actually chosen to work with her because I offer that as an adjunct to my coaching. And that's really fascinating
Yeah, for
when
sure.
I have a nurse who's looking at her career and she does an astrological reading with my fiance and then comes back to coaching and we're like, whoa, we have a lot more to work with here.
Isn't that great? That's
It's
really
kind of
fantastic.
cool. Yeah,
It
it's
is
pretty
very
cool.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of a place, and maybe you can help me with it. I'm not sure how mystical it really is in your view, but there was a
Hmm.
place, there's a shopping center that has a Sprouts over there, like a big Sprouts. It's on a big corner, and there's a Sprouts,
Hmm.
and next to it is a place that's pretty cool. It's like a pretty hip space that has like they've got hydrotherapy going on there and crystals and all sorts of very
Hmm.
cool stuff. Maybe you're familiar with that corner. It's in Santa Fe, of course, and do you know what I'm talking about? There's a place.
I do. That place closed down and another place came in to replace it and is actually quite similar. So they still do
Can
the
you remind me what the
hydrotherapy.
place was called? I forgot. The
I
woman
cannot.
who ran it, the woman who ran it was totally spectacularly cosmic. Like she was
Mhm.
flat out, man. I love that
Very
lady.
much so.
Yeah,
Very
yeah,
much so. So
yeah.
there's a lot of that happening here in Santa Fe, and I know exactly where you're talking about. And there's another place there now called Restore, and they
Okay.
do the cryotherapy and the aquatherapy and IV
Yeah,
therapies and all sorts
yeah,
of things. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I love that place. That was
Hmm.
cool. They
Very
had a
cool.
cool little restaurant too. A cool little restaurant with
The
served
Love Yourself
very,
Cafe, it was called.
very, very, very cool food out of that
Hmm.
place. Yeah, yeah. All right,
Exactly.
very cool. Well, thanks for sharing that with me. I remember that. And so I want to ask a couple questions real briefly about like nursing education. So this idea that you now are headed more towards, you're now in the clinic a little bit, you're actually making money, you get a revenue stream. When things get a little bit dry, you find yourself taking clinical work, which by the way, I also started a couple weeks ago. And most of my friends are kind of shocked that that's the direction I took.
Hmm.
Um, what about nursing education? Is there enough education into the multiple ways to do nursing? Would Florence Nightingale have been happy with the way things have turned out?
She would be happy on a certain level. Um, I think in terms of the ways in which a lot of her original concepts have actually borne fruit in terms of nurses focus on environment and environmental health and also kind of more of a holistic bent. I think in terms of nursing education, I believe still that nursing education to a large extent still has blinders on
Hmm.
because what happens when you have a profession where they're teaching to a national exam, because of course schools want as many graduates to pass the licensing exam as possible because that reflects on them and their
Right.
accreditation
Yeah.
based on how many graduates pass the exam and how many times they have to take it until they get licensed.
Yeah.
So the schools are quite focused on the NCLEX. You hear NCLEX, NCLEX, NCLEX from the day you walk into school till you graduate because you got to pass the exam, understandably. However, what gets lost is that there's so many things outside of acute care, for instance,
Exactly.
hospital care, that get short shrift
That's what I'm wondering
because
about. Exactly.
it's not going to be on the exam. And
Right.
even now, I talk to nurse educators, I talk to several colleagues where they're starting to put questions on the NCLEX about medicinal marijuana because patients are asking about it
Right. Here it
and
comes.
it's becoming legal and pretty soon we're going to have questions about psychedelic therapy on the
Yeah.
NCLEX because it's a thing
Yeah.
and it's going to be legal soon based on the FDA's approval. So they teach to the exam and It's really, nursing education is largely focused on hospitals, acute care, and there's a lot of stuff you can do as a nurse that just does not get mentioned, and that is one of my pet peeves around nursing education these days.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what I was pointing at. So thanks for shining a light on that. That's very interesting. Keith, if you wanted to tell somebody, or maybe tell the world, or tell at least our listeners tonight, like, one thing about nursing, or one thing about self-care, one thing about like even how to avoid doctors and nurses. After all, that's what I like teaching people. As the undoctor, I don't want people to see doctors. I'd rather they wouldn't. And I'd rather people stay out of the hospital. I have way too much experience in a hospital to think that that's a healthy place to be. So I wonder what you think about that. And if you had one thing to say about self-care to our listeners tonight, what would that be?
I think we need to have as much focus on the food we eat as possible. And I think in the United States, well, mainstream culture of the United States, I think there's far too much dead food out there
No
and
kidding.
far too many people eating without consciousness. Now, I'm not coming from a place where I eat perfectly, and I will be the first to say that I could do better. And I think there's always room to do better for most people, though I know a few out there who do pretty damn well and probably have very little improvement they could make. I could definitely improve. And I think it's too easy in our culture to lean on stuff that we shouldn't lean on. And we all know what those things are in our lives that we lean on. And if we can even replace one thing in our nutritional go-to list that isn't necessarily that great a choice, if we can replace one of those things periodically, I think we're doing ourselves an enormous favor in terms of preventive care.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I'm reminded of a couple other places in Santa Fe.
Yeah.
And one of them is this guy, he owns a little honey shop on the corner. He just has honey from like all over the flipping world.
He does.
This guy is, it's got a bee. I think he's got a painted bee on his building or something like that. This guy is very, very cool too. That is a super cool place. And speaking of great food, I have it that honey isn't even food. Like honey is better than food. Honey is like the coolest shit ever. And this guy told me that he actually ate honey only for like a couple months. That's all he ever did, during this run. And it kept him very nutritious and very sound, and sound of mind and sound of body. So there's that. Yeah.
I know that guy, and I don't even have to guess. I know that he was eating incredibly pure raw honey.
Just amazingly pure honey. That place is amazing. Truly amazing.
Yeah.
And then there's another place that maybe isn't quite the same level of amazing, but for taste buds, it was great. And it sure seemed like it was pretty organic. And I don't even remember the corner that this one was on, but it was a dosa place. There's like a very cool dosa place that people just crowd around every night. And that was another place that I loved in Santa Fe.
It's called Paper Dosa.
Paper Dosa. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's the places downtown. That famous sort of one also on the corner of next to the square, not far from the square, that everyone goes to, like people, all the, God, that has like a Southwestern name or something.
Pasquale's.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you.
So I can read your mind, Fred.
Yeah, exactly. So I really, really love Santa Fe. I'm glad that we were able to talk tonight. If our listeners want to learn a little bit more about you or what you've learned, where can they find you? Maybe they want to talk to you about getting you as a speaker, getting you as a teacher, or learning from you, or reading perhaps some of your writing or your blogs or your posts. How can people find you, Nurse Keith?
NurseKeith.com is sort of the central clearinghouse. They can find links to all my social media and to the podcast. There's a podcast drop-down menu, and you'll see Dr. Fred not too far down the drop-down menu because you were a recent guest. And, the Nurse Keith Show is sort of a great place if you want to hear some interviews with really interesting people like Dr. Fred.
Yeah.
And it's not all about nursing careers. A lot of it is just some really cool people doing cool things in the world around health and healthcare.
Yeah.
So it's, I've been doing it for many, many years, and it's one of the most fun things I do in terms of my professional work.
I was going to ask you what is the most fun thing, and I wondered if that was it. Yeah.
Podcasting, meeting people like you. I mean, that's really like hopping on the mic and chatting is, I mean, what could be
Nothing
more
better.
fun than that, really?
Nothing better. That's all we really want. All 8 billion of us is just to be heard and seen for who we are. And this
Yeah.
is an opportunity to do that. So
Good point, Dr. Fred.
all right. Really great, Nurse Keith. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being a friend. Thanks for having me on and reciprocating. And it's just a great opportunity to see you again and meet you again. Have a great conversation. And I trust our listeners enjoyed it as well. And it's Dr. Fred now saying goodbye to each of you. And we will catch you on the flip side. If you're enjoying The Healthy Healer, give me a shout. Let me know what you're thinking. It's always good to like, share, or comment or subscribe. And that really helps us get this show out to the right people. Keith, thanks for being here. It's been wonderful. And we'll catch you on the flip side. Bye for now.
Thank you, Fred.
You're welcome.